Okay, hello Script Apart listeners. Welcome to another episode. My name's Al Horner. I sound a little bit throaty today, don't I? I'm kind of under the weather at the minute. I've been screaming at the World Cup in various pubs around London for like 2 weeks now, so don't feel too bad. I've definitely brought this upon myself. Alright, this week's show, it's a good one. My guest today is a pioneer of prestige TV. He's renowned for writing some of the best loved episodes of The Sopranos. He created the incredible Boardwalk Empire. He's currently captivating audiences with the brand new Paramount Plus show Tulsa King, and he's written incredible movies too. In 2013, my guest today collaborated with Martin Scorsese on the delightfully debaucherous The Wolf of Wall Street. Yes, this week I had the pleasure of chatting with the one and only Terence Winter. Now, Terence didn't just write The Wolf of Wall Street, he almost was the Wolf of Wall Street, at least that's how he tells it. The 62-year-old was a stone's throw away from the film's subject, Jordan Belfort, on the day of the infamous Black Monday stock market crash of 1987. He explains in this episode how they moved in some of the same circles. He told me how he sometimes wonders what might have happened had they met in real life, the degree to which he might have been seduced into a life spent selling penny stocks in the hedonistic world of high finance. Instead, Terence moved to Hollywood in 1991, intent on writing screenplays. What happened next would help define the future of television. After a brief spell writing for sitcoms, he became a screenwriter synonymous with American criminality and the human beings behind the most monstrous behaviour imaginable. Terence would go on to write 22 episodes of The Sopranos, including the famous Pine Barrens episode, which is up there with my favourite episodes of TV of all time. After that, he stepped out on his own with Boardwalk Empire, which ran for 5 brilliant seasons. This month, as I mentioned, Terence added a new show to his list of accomplishments, Tulsa King, co-created with Yellowstone's Taylor Sheridan. Starring Sylvester Stallone as a mob hand rebuilding his life and business empire following a lengthy stay in prison, it hits some familiar beats for fans of Terence's work, while also gravitating into exciting new territory. In the conversation you're about to hear, Terence breaks down for me his script for The Wolf of Wall Street and gives a spoiler-free guide to how he crafted Tulsa King. We talk about his career-long exploration of American criminality, the trick to endearing audiences to characters capable of such devastation, the construction of Wolf of Wall Street's iconic Quaalude scene, and the film's really interesting legacy post-release, as parallels were drawn between the culture of conmen depicted in the film and the rise of Donald Trump. It's a really fun chat spanning not just one of my favourite modern-era Scorsese movies, but also one of 2022's most engrossing new shows. I really hope you guys enjoy it. Thank you as ever to our Patreon community for helping make this episode possible. If you'd like to get involved there, head to patreon.com/scriptapart. We really appreciate your support. Okay, here with no further ado, this is Terence Winter discussing the first draft secrets of The Wolf of Wall Street and Tulsa King. Thanks for tuning in. You're listening to Script Apart, hosted by me, Al Horner, produced by Camille Demek. Terence Winter, such a joy to have you with us today. How's it going?
It's going great. We just had the premiere of Tulsa King last night on TV. It went really well. I'm getting a ton of congratulatory texts and emails from friends and family and stuff, and people online seem to really like it. So very, very happy.
Yeah, do you still get the same kind of anticipation, the same buzz when something's premiering? Like even after all these years and after all this success?
Yeah, you spend so much time working on something, and there's hundreds of people involved in the project, and there's just sort of this is what it's all about, is finally getting it out into the world and seeing how people react. I mean, the goal is to entertain people, and it's still a really great thrill to hear that it worked. Or, the best thing is to sit in an audience full of people watching it at a screening and know what's coming, and then they laugh in all the right places or gasp in all the right places, whatever it is. When that works, it's great. But yeah, the buildup is, you sort of waiting for it, and you're more excited than anybody because you're the ones who made it. So it's still just exciting now.
Well, I've been loving what I've seen of the show so far. I've been sent 2 episodes and yeah, I've had an absolute blast with it. It's also really fun to watch, just kind of as someone who's followed your career for a while, because, there's a history of American criminality spanning an entire century now that's kind of trackable in your filmography, Terence. So if Boardwalk documented Prohibition-era organized crime in America,
if The Wolf of Wall Street documented kind of a late 80s era of kind of white collar crime, and then if The Sopranos documented the kind of somewhat uneasy transition of organized crime into the new millennium, how would you describe Tulsa King? How does this expand this almost kind of career-long fascination of yours into criminality that's been the basis of a lot of your work?
Well, it's a kind of an exploration of the decline of the Italian-American mafia. They've kind of been eviscerated, not only by the federal government and RICO laws, but there's competition. There's the Russian mob, the Albanian mob. I mean, there's, the Italian-American mob used to be, the end of all of it. They ran it all. And now there's other very, powerful organizations they're competing with. So it's changed quite a bit. And that's sort of, part of the rationalization, at least that's part of the rationalization that the boss's son on Tulsa King says, go out to Tulsa because, again, there's nothing here for you, meaning there's not enough work to go around in a weird way. So we've got to find new territory. So this kind of explores that a little bit.
Yeah, it's really interesting, that you are a screenwriter synonymous at this point with criminals and the kind of mechanics of their operations. That's very much something you become renowned for. That, of course, isn't how it began. You were originally, from what I understand, set out in the 90s to become a sitcom writer, which you did before moving into this field. After all this time, how close have you got to figuring out exactly what it is that kind of drew you into this topic? Like, does your focus on criminals come from the proximity to crime that you had kind of growing up working in the butcher shop, which I think was allegedly owned by the Gambino crime family? Or is there just something kind of inherently exciting about vicariously getting to live out the lives of criminals for a couple of hours on screen?
It's a little of that. And it's funny, somebody asked me this question once, and I really had to think back to what was the first thing that made me fascinated. And I grew up in New York watching a lot of the old Warner Brothers gangster movies, but it was really, honestly, the musical Oliver that first got me interested in gangsters. I was obsessed with the Artful Dodger. I wanted to be the Artful Dodger. I thought that was the coolest thing ever, to be part of this criminal gang, to be this slick guy who could, use his skills to pick people's pockets and, just to be part of that underworld gang was really, really intriguing to me. And about a year later, The Sting came out, the movie with Robert Redford and Paul Newman about con men. So that kind of morphed to that, the whole idea of using your wits to steal things. It just became really fascinating to me. And around the same time, I started, I'm now 12, 13 years old. I started to sort of become aware of the greater world around me in Brooklyn. And that was the real life mob guys, who I sort of, observed. And then I, shortly after that started working in that butcher shop. And then, as I read and expanded, I just became more and more fascinated with that world and the idea of these people that lived outside the lines. So that was really it. It was kind of a circumstance of where I grew up and also being exposed to, it's sort of, life imitating art in a way of, and again, it all started so funny. I mean, it sounds so innocent. The Oliver is this big sprawling musical. And I was like, that was the thing that got me interested in crime and writing about criminals. But that was really it. That was ground zero for me.
Which leads us really sweetly into The Wolf of Wall Street, I suppose. We'll come back to Tulsa King. We're going to tackle both today. I'm really intrigued to hear how your writing process differs for each, one being a film, the other being, of course, streaming era TV. But yeah, first and foremost, that idea of us as an audience of law-abiding citizens, mostly, being able to kind of like live out vicariously the lives of people who don't abide by those laws, that's really interesting to me. I think a truth about characters like Jordan, like Tony Soprano, all of these guys, something that's crucial to their enduring appeal is, had a voice of morality not popped into each of our heads at kind of key junctures in our lives, it's not unfeasible to think that we might have gone down those same routes or similar ones. Like, from what I understand, that was especially true of you and The Wolf of Wall Street. You had been 15 minutes away from Jordan, like the real life Jordan, on the day of the Wall Street crash. You've talked before about seeing the seduction and how easily it could have been you on that path. Can you tell me a bit about that, Terence?
Yeah, I mean, my interest in, con men, didn't end there. I was a little bit of a con man myself as a kid. I was a scammer from early on, I just loved the idea. I've sort of employed my own scams. I remember I had I was always interested in making money, of course, so I always worked. I had a deep work ethic, but it didn't end at, honest work. I remember there was a comic book that had an ad in it that said you could sell personalized greeting cards for people and go door to door and, sell personalized Christmas cards or birthday cards, whatever it was, with the family's name on it. And when I got the brochure and they sent me the whole sales kit, and I looked at it and I realized like I had to sell like $1 million worth of greeting cards to make any real money. But then I thought, the con artist in me kicked in, and I thought, well, if I just went door to door under an assumed name and took deposits for this and then just threw away the sales says I could just keep the money. So I spent a couple of weekends taking the bus in and to other neighborhoods in Brooklyn, went door to door, acted really nerdy, and said, "Oh, I'm selling these personalized greeting cards, and you just have to give me a $20 deposit." And I probably took $1,000 worth of deposit money over the course of a couple of weekends, and then just threw the sales kit in the garbage. And I was like, "This is I was like 12 years old, 11 years old, and I'm actually perversely proud of it. That I was sharp enough to do that, and also it was of course horrible, but I was always thinking that way. So I had the con artist in my DNA. And it's funny, it wasn't until many years later, I was not until my 40s that I did my family's genealogy, and we did not know much about our great grandparents. It sort of ended very early, and I started to do get into the details of who these people were and doing online research. It turned out my great grandfather's address, who I knew nothing about him, in 1900 was Sing Sing prison. And it turned out he was a con man. And I was like, oh, well, this is where I get this from. So he tried to swindle my great grandfather out of a bunch of money. And that's how they caught him. So I was like, oh, wow, I wonder if this actually is in my blood. I mean, I'm not only interested in it, but I'm actually have that propensity. So anyway, all the way flashing forward to reading about Jordan Belfort, I was like, man, there by the grace of God, we're basically the same age. I grew up in Brooklyn. He grew up very nearby in Queens, which is very similar. He was a hustler as a kid, selling Italian ices on the beach. And I was doing the same kinds of things in Brooklyn. And he went to Wall Street and I went to Wall Street. I was in law school at the time. He was a stockbroker, and literally 15 minutes away from each other. I was working for Merrill Lynch. He was working for LF Rothschild on the day the stock market crashed in 1987. And we were both sort of presented with, okay, what now? I sort of started to think about maybe leaving law altogether, the very embryonic stages of maybe going to Hollywood and being a writer, which was my deep, dark secret. And Jordan went off to Long Island to sell penny stocks. But I'm convinced that had I met this guy, it's not out of the realm of possibility that I would have been working with him or for him in Long Island selling penny stocks, because it's something I know I could have done very well. I'm a pretty good salesman, a pretty good bullshit artist, and that might not have been outside the realm of possibility. And obviously, I'm glad it worked out the way it did. But I read that book. I was like, man, I totally understand this guy in 2 seconds.
Yeah, I've got to say, I did come across, this is a while back now, so you'll have to correct me if I've got any of the details wrong, but I did come across a story a while back in which you were describing some of that kind of bullshit artist, some of your capacity to kind of like bend the rules to your advantage. You were talking about when you first got to Hollywood, you obviously kind of came afoul of the fact that like you can't get an agent without a job, but you can't get a job without an agent. So essentially you posed as your own agent, or you paid... You paid a law firm, buddy?
I created an entire phony talent agency to represent myself. Because that was the irony when I got to Hollywood. I finally found the thing I knew I absolutely wanted to do. I've been kidding myself my entire life, and it wasn't until my late 20s, I think I was 27, 28, when I really had to do some deep, dark soul searching. I was already an attorney working in a massive law firm in Manhattan. I passed the bar exam in New York and Connecticut. By all on paper was very successful, but I was absolutely miserable. And I finally woke up one morning and just said, okay, what do you want to do when you wake up in the morning? Forget the law degree and the big fancy job. How do you don't want to spend your day? And the big, deep, dark secret was I wanted to be a writer, and specifically a comedy writer. And the reason I chose sitcom writing was initially, I thought I was funny, but more importantly, I couldn't imagine writing anything that took longer than 30 minutes. The idea of writing a movie was like impossible. How do you tell a story over 2 hours? It's so unwieldy. Even an hour felt so daunting to me. But 22 minutes, I was like, yeah, I could do that. And I watched a billion hours of sitcom programming by that time. And I thought, I understand the rhythms of how this works. So that was specifically, what I initially wanted to do. But it started there.
So jumping forward a few decades to The Wolf of Wall Street, you discover this book. And from the sounds of it, you absolutely tear through it in one sitting. You've previously described the film being an analogy for American life, and there being a certain Kardashianization, I suppose, of like American behavior and aspiration that you immediately identified as being able to tap into with this tale. It sounds like you had a pretty immediate sense that you could tell an entertaining story here that could also speak to a wider trend in where the culture was heading at the time. Can you tell me about that process, Terence, of potential stories that you might want to take on, passing like a threshold, I suppose, of not just being entertaining, but also having something to say, something that elevates it beyond just being a series of scenes in which bad people commit bad deeds?
Well, Tulsa King is a good example as well, on its face. And I inherited this idea from Taylor Sheridan. On its face, it's about a 75-year-old man who goes to, a strange city and, plants a flag. For me, what made it really interesting, I said, wow, there's something fascinating about a man toward the, in the twilight of his years, who now has to rethink everything he believed in. There's a guy who's lived by a code of ethics and, the mafia code of omerta his whole life and has believed in this wholeheartedly, and now has the rug pulled out from under him and is now questioning everything he ever believed at 75 years old. And he realizes that the people he thought had his back do not give a shit about him. And now he's only got a limited amount of time left and a limited amount of skills left. And he's estranged from his family in a strange place. So that was the thing that I thought, it's about something bigger than just what it is. And Wolf of Wall Street was the same thing. I mean, even though it was the rise and fall of, this Wall Street, white collar criminal, it really spoke the thing that hit me, that it was more holding up a mirror to society, was the idea that when there was an article, a very unflattering article written about Jordan Belfort in a magazine that he thought was going to be the end of his career. And then when he came to work on Monday morning, there were dozens of guys there wanting jobs. I was like, they completely took the wrong message from this article. All they saw was this guy's making a fortune. And that's the thing. I was like, oh my God, people don't care about whether it's legal or illegal. All they know is the guy has a Lamborghini and he makes a shit ton of money and he wears Rolexes and he's got this huge house. And that's there's nothing sadly more American than that. It's really the means justify the ends. It's sort of like, wow. I mean, there's no, and you can sort of hold that same mirror up to politics, where it's all about winning. It's not about whether it's right or wrong. It's like, we won. And it's like, okay, well, but at what cost? And that was really the thing that got me hooked on Wolf.
Yeah, in terms of holding up a mirror to society, as you say, I was having a conversation with my friend when I was telling them I was chatting to you, Terence, and I was like, yeah, I think we're going to speak at length about Wolf of Wall Street. And they said, oh, cool, you're getting ahead of the 10-year anniversary. I said, there's no way this film's 10 years old. Well, yeah.
What?
Well, this is the thing. Like, I think partly my brain can't comprehend that this film was released in 2013.
I can't either.
Well, for me, it's partly because it does just feel like yesterday that the film came out, but also I've always regarded it like as such a Trump era movie thematically that I think that's where my brain kind of bumps up against something. Trump was, as you mentioned, politics. He was and is, I suppose, a salesman whose success was built on a succession of mirages. And like Jordan, he'd reel people in with this dream of wealth and riches and yachts and respect. But ultimately, what he was selling these people was to their detriment. Right. It must have been a crazy journey for you with this film, like after it came out, seeing it kind of, well, presumably take on a bit of a new relevance, a new urgency.
Yeah, I mean, it's sort of, I had the same reaction where, you say, okay, this is a cautionary tale, and, Jordan's not meant to be a hero. And yet, there were a new generation of young men who want to be Jordan Belfort. Like, yeah, no, that's not what we're trying to do here. And I have no control over that, other than say, here it is, take away from it what you will. But a lot of what, a lot of young people were taking away was, I want to be that guy. And I want to live that. I mean, there's like apparently like a big rap song dedicated to Jordan, and that whole movie has become kind of a cult favorite among particularly young men and some young women, I imagine. But it's like completely the opposite of what we intended. But yeah, the Trump thing, I guess we were a little prescient in terms of predicting, that a Jordan Belfort type was going to be running the world, or our world certainly. And honestly, I hesitate to compare Jordan to Trump. Jordan's not nearly, Jordan's actually a very decent guy, as it turns out. I mean, he's one of these people, who kept drawing lines for himself in the sand of like, I'll do this, but I'd never do that. And then, because of his addiction and his just circumstance, he kept drawing these lines in the sand. And before he knew it, he was underwater. And then it was too late, and now, he's actually, made great, strides trying to rectify the sins of the past. And certainly Trump, is just doubling and tripling down on his behavior. So it's not really a fair comparison.
Had you anticipated that some people would interpret this cautionary tale as something aspirational?
I didn't really think about it, and I guess even I would feel foolish now to have that much faith in people because they kind of in general make the bad choices, and the easy choices, and look, it's just again a very American thing. People want to be success and they value success over everything else, and it doesn't matter how you made the money. It's just the fact that you have it and you're successful, and it doesn't matter if you did it legally or illegally. I mean, we tend to admire people who they got theirs, and you look the other way when you find out how they did it.
Yeah, watching the film and rereading the script, it feels like your only goal was to tell that story truthfully and in a style kind of befitting of the zoo that was his life and Wall Street at the time.
Yeah, I didn't want to take a position. I wasn't trying to paint. That's not. I don't view that as my job. My job is to tell the story, and then you take away from it what you will. I don't. Same thing. Like I don't need to. For example, let's have a moment where he's sympathetic and he saves a cat from a kitten out of a tree, so people like him. You just sort of paint people in all of their colors, and then in general, even with the worst people, nobody's all one thing. Nobody's all bad or all good. There are moments of if not empathy, or sympathy, you'll find something at least relatable. Like a Tony Soprano, loves his daughter, loves his family, and you go, all right, well, you know what, I love my family. I understand that. Or he's got insecurities, and there are moments of relatability, at least, where you go, okay, I get it. I did Boardwalk Empire. Al Capone was one of the characters. And one of the great gifts of doing a long form TV series is that you get to spend a lot of time with these characters. So normally in a movie, you'd meet Al Capone at the height of his power when he's a gangster with the white fedora and the cigar and the machine guns. You don't really get a lot. You get a lot out of that other than he's a bad guy. But in our series, you got to meet Al Capone as a young man. You first meet him. He's literally the kid driving somebody else's truck, and he grows to be the Al Capone we know, love, and hate. So then you meet his family, you meet his wife. You realize he has a deaf son who he adores, and by the time he goes to prison in the last episode. We had a scene where he says goodbye to his son, and people called me up and said, I can't believe you made me cry for Al Capone. I was actually shedding tears over this horrible, horrible man. But I said, look, because you now know him in all of his aspects, not just the gangster stuff. It's he actually has a kid, and you can relate to that.
It's a really difficult needle to thread, though, in a screenwriting sense. Anyone who's tried to write a Sopranos-style story, a Boardwalk-style story, like they can hopefully attest that, making a character likable despite the egregiousness of their behavior, finding something human in the monster, it's a tricky thing to pull off. When you look at Sopranos, like you can see the construction of like, I think it was David who wrote this episode, but I think it's the pilot with the ducks. And it's such a sort of obvious kind of like signaling of there's something sweet buried within this person capable of such violence.
Right.
When you look back on like Wolf of Wall Street, was it as hard kind of finding ways to make him likable? And was there anything you had to keep out from his true life story to make sure you kept audiences on board?
No, I mean you pretty much get the full brunt of how dark it got, with the drug addiction, and obviously the criminality in his relationship with Nadine, and the violence that was born of the addiction and all that stuff. But Jordan is very likable. But before I started writing the script, I met him a bunch of times. I had dinner with his parents. I had lunch with Nadine, the real Nadine, his ex-wife, he's very charming. Obviously, he's a great salesman, but he started out as this really ambitious, hardworking kid from Queens, and then again, like I said, just devolved into that guy. So it wasn't hard. I knew if I sort of just depicted him truthfully, that there would be moments of, he's funny and likable, and again, very much there by the grace of God for a lot of people. They're like, yeah, I understand how he, here's a guy who, he works on Wall Street, he gets trained as a stockbroker, and he's ready to go, and now suddenly he can't make a living, and he kind of goes to this other place and slowly gets roped into this other way of doing things, and the natural con artist in him comes out, and then again, before you know it, you add cocaine and Quaaludes to that mix, and you're off to the races.
One thing that really struck me on this recent read through is I don't think I really had noticed before how the film refuses to lean too heavily on the iconography of the era. Like, many filmmakers, I think, would have really lent into the sort of 80s-ness of it all and gone to town on the fashion, the music, and other signifiers of that decade. You and Marty had obviously made a decision not to do that, and as a result, it feels like much more of a timeless piece. Was there kind of a particular reason behind that? Obviously, the kind of greed driving Jordan is still alive in our culture today. So I had wondered whether you'd talked about not making it too 80s and risk having audience interpret this behavior as a relic of a different moment in American capitalism.
Yeah, the truth is we did not talk about it, and that's a better question for Marty. And look, there's literally not a moment or a visual or a word that Marty does not think about very deeply. So I'm sure this is a very specific choice that he made, and maybe it's what your analysis of it sounds right, that it feels more timeless. It doesn't feel like a period piece or a commentary on the 80s and the Wall Street era greed is good kind of stuff. It's just more of a tale for any time. And the interesting thing too is there was a book and a movie, and I think a silent movie in the 1920s called The Wolf of Wall Street, about a Wall Street swindler. So it's sort of like, it's so funny, 100 years later it's still the same. Wall Street is always going to attract people like Jordan and people who are looking to make a fast buck. So in a way, it is a timeless story.
Terence, you were a new parent, I believe, 2007. You sat down to write this. From what I understand, the first draft was basically unchanged, pretty much the shooting script. At the outline stage, though, were there things that you had explored that didn't make this draft? Were there kind of other avenues that you contemplated before realizing that's not the right approach?
Yeah, I mean, whenever I adapt something, what I look for is, what I call movie moments. Like, this has to be in the movie. Oh, what a great moment. This has to be in the movie. I circle them in the book or the article, whatever I'm reading. And the problem with The Wolf of Wall Street is I ended up circling practically the entire book. I was like, okay, now what do I do? This is going to be a 14-hour movie. I basically had to go back and find a through line of the movie that told the whole story. And that wasn't 14 hours long. So there were scenes that didn't make it in the movie. There were some scenes that got combined. A good example is there's a scene where, the big Quaalude scene. Jordan, takes too many Quaaludes and then has to drive his car home. That scene, and then when he gets home, he finds Donnie starts choking on the ham sandwich. Those two incidents, the choking and the Quaalude scene, were actually two separate scenes that we combine, and that saves some time and enable us to make the movie in a reasonable amount of time. So there's a lot of that stuff.
Well, actually, one thing that we should talk about is what's left out, because it struck me rereading the script that you don't really show the victims of Jordan's scamming. And well, I suppose there are kind of two benefits of this. Firstly, it does allow the audience to stay on board with the character and not be kind of too up in their heads about the impact of his behavior. But also, that is an absolute reflection of Jordan's lack of empathy for his victims at the time. Mm-hmm. Like, I don't get the impression that people like Jordan think about those that suffer as a result of their actions, that they're able to kind of perform like a type of mental gymnastics to exclude the victims from their own kind of personal narratives. Can you talk me through like that decision? Was that again something that came in intuitively, or had you and Marty discussed that?
We did discuss it. In a way, we sort of arrived at the idea that, you, the audience, are the client. You're being sold the story. Jordan is selling you his version of events. And by the end of it, you're just as taken in with Jordan as his clients were. You didn't lose anything. Hopefully you've been entertained for a couple of hours, but in a weird way, you're in the position of a person who's on the other end of the phone from Jordan, letting him charm you and sell you this this fantasy. So that was sort of the bigger thing. But you're absolutely right. I mean, I think there is a disconnect with criminals in general, where they don't think about the victims. They can't. If you psychologically lay in bed at night and think of the impact your horrible deeds have had on the people you've perpetrated them upon, you wouldn't be able to get out of bed in the morning. So you just put it out of your mind and keep going and don't worry about it. Or you rationalize. They thought they were getting a great. I mean, there's the old expression: you can't cheat an honest man. I mean, you're selling somebody something. They think they're getting a great deal. They think they're swindling you in a weird way. So you rationalize, well, they thought they were getting a great deal, and actually they didn't realize I was robbing them, but they were actually trying to rob me. It may or may not be true, but that's how I think a lot of criminals view it.
As a result, the film mainly plays through Jordan's perspective, with the exception of kind of the net closing in, the cops, the FBI. We spend not actually that much screen time with Kyle Chandler, but man, he's so good in this film.
Yeah.
Can you tell me about sprinkling that in? The sort of culmination of claustrophobia is you can feel the grip tightening on Jordan and his ability to sort of maintain this lifestyle.
Yeah, I mean, there had to be something on the horizon, that was closing in on this guy, just in terms of conflict. Otherwise, it would have been pretty much smooth sailing for him, for most of the movie. So we had to show the other side, that something out there was looming, unbeknownst to Jordan, for the first part, certainly, but no, at least for the audience to know that there is another shoe that is going to drop at some point, that he is on the radar of the FBI, and particularly this one agent. The other thing we wanted to really show is the idea that, here's a guy who, a federal agent who's living by the books and doing the right thing. And, he's, by the end of the movie, he's on the subway with a bunch of other people, and Jordan is still, despite the fact that he's been arrested and gone to jail, is still going to always live better than the people who do the right thing and arrested him. And, just the irony of that was something that was really interesting to us.
Was it difficult balancing what people do know and what they don't know about that world, like this sort of IPOs and these kind of jargony things? I mean, obviously there's that moment in the story where Jordan begins explaining something and then goes, I'm paraphrasing here, but he's like, you don't care. Here's
Right.
what you basically need to know. Was kind of working out how to kind of cut through that and get to the kind of thesis of the movie. Was that tricky? I mean, the film does start with this incredible opening scene that kind of plunges you into Jordan's world, where he has a great monologue about how money doesn't just buy you a better life, better food, better cars, better pussy. It also makes you a better person. You can give generously to the church of your choice or the political party. In fact, there's a line in the script that didn't make it into the film, but most of all, in any country in the world, money can buy you love. Fuck the Beatles. I don't know why that didn't make it in. That's a great line. Yeah, can you tell me about how about working out how to communicate all this theoretically quite unwieldy stuff, how to communicate it to an audience of kind of popcorn movie fans?
There was much more of the jargony stuff in there initially, and I thought we really needed it. I really wanted to explain that. People are going to wonder, how does this work? And it ended up changing quite a bit when I, in the 6 weeks leading up to the actual production of the movie, I pretty much met with Marty and Leo every night to go through the script scene by scene and talk about it. So Marty, particularly, every time we would get to something particularly jargon heavy, would say, how does this work again? So I don't really get this. And I would start to explain it. And I finally realized, I said, you know what? I said, this, you know what this reminds me of? It reminds me of like, a science fiction movie when, they started explaining about how how the engine of the ship works and how it's going to explode. And if the flux capacitor overloads at some point, it's like, once they start talking about that stuff, all the audience really hears is blah, 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 blah. And usually, like in the science fiction, what you need to know is if that red light goes on, we're fucked. The ship is going to blow up. So it's similar here. When Jordan starts explaining how an IPO works, basically what he can basically say is, you know what? You don't care about this. It's not important. All you need to know is we made $10 million in 5 minutes. And that's it. That's really all you want to know. It's all you care about. So we said, why don't we just shine a light on it? And literally Jordan can say it right to the audience. It doesn't matter, all the technical jargon. The one thing I did want to show, was the actual sales technique, the actual psychology of how do you sell somebody a penny stock? How do you sell a rich person a penny stock? And there's that sequence in the movie where Jordan starts to explain it to the guys, and then slowly you see them on the phone, and you cut to them giving the sales pitch of how do you say, well, Al, if you think if you agree IBM stock is going to go up, then what's preventing you from buying IBM? Obviously, if it's going up, why would you not give me $5,000 today? And and you see how the slow reeling in. And you sort of take the client and box them into a corner and almost use their own words and their own agreement with you to come to an inevitable conclusion, which is they should give you money and buy whatever it is you're selling them. So that was something I thought was accessible for the audience, easy to understand and entertaining to watch how Jordan developed the system, and also just showed you how smart and what a great salesman Jordan was. So that I felt was important to keep. But the technical stuff, it doesn't matter. Again, all you really want to know is we made $10 million in 5 minutes.
Can you tell me about some of the other things that you began to tinker with, and whether this particular element was one of the things that kind of adjusted as production approached? Because, I didn't notice this in the script. In the finished movie, Jordan's kind of Yoda of sorts, his mentor setting him on his way, is Mark Hanna, who was played by Matthew McConaughey.
Yeah.
The dinner they share in the finished film, it kind of ends with Mark leading Jordan through this tribalistic, chest-beating, kind of guttural, I don't know if you'd call it a song, but it's something approaching that. I didn't see that in the script, so I wondered whether that was something that kind of came quite late on and sort of... And what you saw that kind of representing, that tribalistic noise, because it comes back later in the film.
Yeah, that came so late. It was actually in the middle of filming. That I had nothing to do with that. And I wish I could take credit for it. That was all Matthew McConaughey. Jordan and Matthew were shooting that scene. And in between takes, Matthew would start beating his chest and kind of chanting a little bit. And finally, Leo said, "What are you doing?" And Matthew said, well, that's how I stay, energized. I get myself pumped up. And Leo said, that's really fun. Why don't we play with that? And, that's the great thing about working with, actors who are very good at ad-libbing, and also a director who is very comfortable and encouraging, presiding over ad-libbing and chaos of like letting the actors just do whatever they want. Sometimes that's where the gold is. And certainly it was in this case. So they started just riffing on, Jordan saying like, what are you doing? And then they do it with me and do this. And it became such a fun thing that Marty then ended up calling it back at the end of the movie. But again, I wish I had anything to do with it. I had nothing to do with it. And I get credit for it all the time. I go, oh, thank you. That's great. But it's actually Matthew McConaughey. And again, like I said, when you get actors like, Leo, Jonah Hill, Matthew McConaughey, Kyle Chandler, Margot Robbie, who are comfortable ad-libbing and doing great, they only take what's there and elevate it and make it bigger and broader and better. So while, the first draft, you clearly can read it and go, oh yeah, this is the movie, but there's so much else in there. And a lot of that stuff it happened on the day. It happened because the actors were, willing to try things, and that Marty was willing to take them down those roads and say, why don't you play with this, play with that? And that's how he does it.
And to continue skipping through a couple of the kind of key scenes from the film, Terence, we touched on the Quaalude scene earlier. Like, that's one of the biggest, most elongated laughs I've ever experienced in a cinema. And the whole scene is kind of Chaplin-like in its slapstickness.
Right.
Did you, after doing this for so long, do you have a bit of a sixth sense when you've got something down on the page, like that is going to pop off in a cinema. Audiences are going to really respond to this scene. Did you have a sense in this instance that was going to be one of the
I didn't know
moments?
how great it was going to be. When I read the book, I mean, that sequence was hilarious. And then when I scripted it, as you mentioned before, at the time, I originally wrote the movie in 2007. So we had a newborn, and my wife was breastfeeding the baby. And I gave her the screen. I gave her that scene to read. And she started laughing so hard reading it that she almost dropped the baby. And I thought, I have something really good here. So if that was the reaction I got from just somebody reading it on the scripted page, cut to, years later when I saw Leo actually do it, I came home and I had seen the screening before my wife saw it. And I came home and I said, remember how hard you laughed reading that? Wait until you see Leo do this. And originally Marty had planned to do coverage in that scene, which means he's going to film the angle, film the scene from different angles, cover it from different camera angles. And the first angle was, okay, it's a wide shot of the staircase and you just see Leo come down, and then he was going to do it from the side and from overhead and everything else. Well, Leo was so unbelievably funny in that one wide shot that Marty said, I'm done. I don't need any other angles. We're just going to let this play out in real time. And I don't know how many minutes it is. And it's got to be like 4 minutes of Leo trying to get down those stairs and into that car. And you just lock off the camera and let him do it. And that's what's in the movie. And I've seen it in theaters with people, and you're right. I mean, people laughing for 4 minutes straight. And Leo is so committed. It's so unbelievable to watch him do that and realize that, he's not actually on Quaaludes. He's acting. That's all. And it's pretty amazing. Yeah.
The crescendo of that scene, like you're laughing so hard the first time you watch it that it takes a few rewatches. It takes a few read-throughs of the script to notice the crescendo that it runs to, and the way that like it amps up and then has this incredible culmination with Jonah Hill's character almost choking. It's so funny. The scene where Jordan announces, I'm not leaving, I'm not fucking leaving. That's obviously another one of the kind of big scenes that people remember. What do you think that moment says about the addictiveness of money? Obviously, you write into that scene kind of an emotionality and a sense of family that contributes to Jordan's inability to get out while he's ahead. But as the guy kind of charged with getting under Jordan's skin, why do you think he couldn't walk away? What's happening in that scene?
I think he was addicted to the adoration of his people. The real Jordan would get up every day, twice a day, and give these incredible speeches to his sales force. And he's an incredibly gifted public speaker. When I started writing the script and researching the script, I said, reading about these speeches that you gave, I said, I'd love to see, a tape of you. Do you have some videotape I can watch? And he said, God, I never taped myself doing it. And I said, wow, that's incredible. And I said, if I got a conference room, for example, at CAA, the talent agency, and packed it with, agents and assistants on their lunch hour, would you come in and recreate one for me? And he said, oh my God, I haven't done this in 15 years, but yeah, sure, I'll try. So we did that. CAA gave me a conference room and we packed it full of people. And Jordan came in on, I think it was a Friday afternoon, and he was a little nervous. He said, God, this is so weird, to do this. And he got up and he had a big whiteboard. And I think it took him about 20 seconds to warm up. And once he got rolling, it was astounding. And I just sat there with a tape recorder and or my phone, I guess, and let him rip. And he was magnificent. And he was like interacting with people in the audience and as if they were part of the sales team, and asking them questions and where do you think we are in the sale, and how do you do, and goofing on people, and it was laughing, and it was just unbelievable. And he probably talked for about 15 minutes, but completely off the top, extemporaneously brilliant. And he used to do this every day. And I think, he fed off the crowd, and I could see it that day. And I know he got it from the people, he worked with at Stratton Oakmont, who were really making money and, that really loved him and worshiped him. This was the guy who, he was the Pied Piper who showed them how to become rich. So he would get up there and give you this sales talk that was just like a punch in the arm every day. Just like, get out there and get on those phones. They would they were like an army. They would do anything for this guy. So I think he really became addicted to the love and adoration and the admiration. So when it came time to stand up there and say, I'm walking away and I'm going to cash out and stay home and watch my daughter take, horse riding lessons, it slowly started to dawn on him that he was going to leave this. And, again, also, I have to imagine probably a little bit of the addictive personality and the drug addiction talking as well. But to stand up there and say, fuck the FBI and they're not going to get me. It's like, yeah, not a great idea. But, and then, of course, everybody wants to pretend to be, like they're above all that shit and they're tough guys. And, and then, for the crowd to go, yeah, fuck them, and, you feel like you're the king of the world. They're never going to get you. And of course, that is not how that works. There's one, if any group is scarier than the mob, it's the federal government, it's the IRS, the FBI. They will get you, and they're coming, and there's nothing you can do about it. So that's the deal, and he certainly found that out.
Let's talk about the ending. Like, I understand in terms of accuracy and truth why you ended the film where you did, but thematically, what was so perfect, do you think, about bringing the story to a close with Jordan in front of this crowd of wide-eyed people with hopes and dreams of being rich, and kind of bringing back that idea of him asking people to sell him a pen? Like, that one of the kind of readings of the film and the meaning of that ending was the idea that we're calling back to that scene earlier in the movie. Perhaps Jordan hasn't learned a lesson from any of this, and perhaps neither has America. The fact there are still people lining up to absorb his wisdom, or quote unquote wisdom. What did you kind of intend with that scene?
Well, exactly that, that this will continue, whether or not it continues and these skills are used for ill rather than good is really up to the person learning how to sell. But basically, the roller coaster ride will continue. Certainly, the real Jordan is a motivational speaker and sales trainer now who goes all around the world. And the idea is, of course, you can use these techniques to sell, medical equipment that's actually doing people a world of good and not robbing people. But, again, depending on how you're approaching this, it's really, you can use this for good or for evil. And, hopefully people are using it for good. But, that was kind of the idea that, Jordan, did go to jail and he got out. But, what he does is still in demand. People still want to be him. And he's going to continue to do what he does.
You sound quite positive on Jordan, and you've described him as a decent guy. It seems like he's had some sort of journey of reconciling with some of his behavior and all this kind of thing. Mm-hmm. But there were people, however, of course, who witnessed the trajectory of Jordan after the film's release and saw that kind of, for all the hurt that he had caused, he still came out of the film with 1 million in movie rights and this kind of renewed public platform. The film had kind of immortalized him in a way. And as you kind of spoke to earlier, there were people that kind of interpreted him as a hero. Was there any part of you that had any kind of unease about that? Or, was it just kind of part of the bargain? This is ultimately like a pretty anti-capitalistic tale, I think, to anyone kind of watching the film from my perspective with their head screwed on. Like, mm-hmm. did you kind of just see that as part of a necessary evil in terms of making this film?
Yeah, I mean, again, I try to approach it without judgment myself. I tell the story. The audience can take away from it what they will. In terms of the real Jordan, look, the guy went to jail. He did his time. He's paid back a certain amount of money. I don't know. There's a lot of debate on has he paid back enough or all of it or some of it. But I know he has obviously given up quite a bit. I mean, he did. He paid his debt to society in a way. So, okay. And he is remorseful. He is earning money and, doing what he does best. He's a salesperson and a motivational speaker. And again, you don't have to like the guy. But I happen to. I know him personally, and I know he's a decent guy. It's complicated. He's not perfect, nor am I or anybody else. So, I don't think you have to decide, he's all good or all bad. Like I said, everybody is made up of all these different colors. But on balance, this is a guy I really like and a guy who I think is a decent person. Has he hurt people? Absolutely. He's the first one to admit that. He hurt his own family, his wife, his kids. I mean, he's, nobody will cop to that quicker than Jordan. So again, it is complicated, but I don't know that anybody has to take a hard and fast position one way or the other.
Yeah, I think a running thread in your work seems to be trying to understand problematic people rather than condemn them on the page. Do you think that's a fair assessment?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there are limits. I mean, there are certain people who, I don't know that I could paint Osama bin Laden out to be a great guy. But I know I want to, but, or Hitler, you're like, I don't really care that he liked his dog. But, the Jordan Belforts of the world, maybe a little.
The first draft of Wolf of Wall Street, as we touched on, pretty closely resembled the finished film. Tulsa King, on the other hand, well, the first draft, from what I understand, of the pilot wasn't even set in Tulsa. It was Kansas City, and the title of the show was then, well, Kansas City King, I presume. Can you explain to our listeners the kind of reasoning behind that evolution and how this thing landed in your hands?
Yeah, when I first read it, it was actually just called Kansas City. I had gotten a call from my agent, who also represents Taylor Sheridan, who, of course, is the creator of Yellowstone and 19 other shows, apparently. It seems at this point. It's like every time I turn on my computer, there's another Taylor Sheridan show being announced. And my agent called me up and he said, hey, Taylor wrote a pilot really quickly, like over the course of a weekend, about an aging mobster who goes to Kansas City, and Sly Stallone is apparently attached to do this. And Taylor, being so busy, can't possibly do this too. But he suggested, well, what if Terry Winter would want to take it over? That would be great. And I said, Taylor Sheridan, Sly Stallone, let me think about this. And I thought about it for about a nanosecond, like, I'm in. Absolutely. So he sent me the pilot and I read it. And I thought it was really fun. But I had my own ideas. So I had a Zoom call with Taylor and I said, yeah, it's something really interesting about, again, this 75-year-old man who's sort of, at the twilight of his life, who's sort of forced to reinvent himself. I said, if I were to do it, I said, the interesting thing, about the premise is that he is being sent from New York. This is a New York mobster being sent to basically a place that has no connection to the Italian-American mob. And the truth is, Kansas City has a very long and storied history with the Italian-American mob. If you remember Martin Scorsese's movie Casino, when the guys are in Las Vegas and they're calling back home, they're actually calling Kansas City. So I said, it's Kansas City really not the right location for this if we want to really put him in the middle of what he considers nowhere. So I said, from my perspective, looking at the map, Oklahoma feels to me as a New Yorker like the middle of nowhere. And even more specifically, Tulsa, Oklahoma. There is no Italian-American mob presence there whatsoever. So I changed that. And then I said, you also, in Taylor's original draft, the character Dwight, who was named Sal at that point, was just as he described himself, a low-level bag man, collects money for the mob. I said, what if he was actually a very formidable mob capo who's been in jail for 25 years? And he gets out and he really thinks he's going to get rewarded. And he's kept his mouth shut and he's adhered to that code of omerta. And he really is expecting to get now what he expects. And instead, the boss's son is now in charge. And the boss's son desperately wants to get rid of this guy because he knows he's not half the man Dwight is. And they basically ship him out to Tulsa to kind of just go away and die. And now he realizes that everything he gave his life to is bullshit. That code is worthless. These people don't have his best interest in mind. And he gave up everything. Not only did he give up a third of his life, but he's estranged from his daughter and gave up his actual family. And he's only got a limited amount of time left to do it and very limited conflict resolution skills and work skills. He's still a mobster and he still has to earn money. And he's basically still in prison in a place, that for him might as well be another planet. So those are the things I want to explore. And Taylor said, great, this is your baby. I just have visitation rights. Go do your thing. And that was pretty much the one and only time I met Taylor. We met in person one other time right before we started production. We had dinner and that was it. Those are literally, I only had 2 conversations with the man in the whole time. And he's been great and just sort of letting us go and do our thing. And we went off to Oklahoma and shot it. And that was an adventure.
One of the great kind of textural elements to the show is the fact that, as you mentioned, we've got Dwight, played, of course, by Sly Stallone, finishing a 25-year prison sentence, stepping back into a world now that is so alien to him. Like it's a world of Ubers and kids recording TikToks outside coffee shops where, a coffee will set you back $5. It wasn't like that when he was going into prison. He can't wrap his head around a lot of it. And we're seeing simultaneous to kind of his sort of criminal ascent, we're seeing this journey of him kind of trying to become accustomed to a world that's drastically changed. It seems to kind of be something that you find interesting as a writer. Like you've often written men who are kind of clinging on to the old ways in worlds that have kind of moved on without them. It's a real feature of the writing in The Sopranos. What do you find so fascinating about that? And do you think that's one of those things that kind of like, it's a really, really interesting way when you've got seemingly unemotional protagonists, these aren't very expressive male characters, finding like an emotional heartbeat like that and textures around them that can kind of give a sense of emotionality to them. Is that something that's kind of fun for you to write?
Yeah, I mean, look, I haven't even been in prison, and I can't get over the fact that coffee costs $5 a cup, and I can barely work Uber. I mean, so I can't imagine if you just dropped me out of jail after 25 years, I'd be completely lost. The idea that the world is changing and you can't seem to keep up. I often ask my kids, like, where was I when the rest of the world learned how to work this thing? Like, how they instinctively know how to handle, or my son takes my phone and his fingers fly through the keyboard, pulling things up. And I was like, where was I when you learned how to do this? And I think a lot of people feel that way. So it's really, something I think everybody can relate to in a certain way. Remember when I was a kid, or a teenager, we got a new washing machine at home, and my grandmother, who was, in her 70s at that point, just absolutely was befuddled and just said, I'm done. And I said, no, it's not that hard. Grandma, watch me press this button. I can't. She just absolutely was done with technology at that point. She refused to learn anything else. The world was changing so rapidly that she just refused to learn anything else. She was full up on technology, even though it was actually pretty simple. And I'm kind of getting to that point now, and I'm not nearly that old, but I'm old enough to go, oh my God, I don't know how to do this, I know one way to make this thing work on my computer, and I do it the same way every time. It feels like, there's a shortcut. I don't want to. So, a guy like Sly in this situation, the other thing too is, you said something about a lot of these guys aren't very expressive. I think one of the fun things for me about this character, is this is a guy, by virtue of the fact that he's been in jail for 25 years, he's been working out and reading every day. So he's really smart. He's very, very well read. And he's sort of a much different person than he was 25 years ago. He's a kinder, gentler gangster, if you will. He is still a gangster nonetheless, but he's actually somebody who's a thinking person. Is a moment in the pilot where he's shaking down the owner of a CBD store, and rather than just, smash the guy's foot, he says, let me paint you a picture here of how this is going to go. I'm going to take my right foot and crush your left foot with it. I don't want to do it, but I will if you don't do what you want. 25 years ago, he probably just would have done it and then said, open the fucking safe, So he's not that guy anymore. He is trying to be a better person, and sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. But, he is, kind of the thinking man's mobster, where he's a little more polished. I
love the fact that for plausibility's sake, the pilot has to include a reference to how it's impossible that Sly could be that good looking at 75, how he could be in that great shape. Really enjoyed that.
Well, yeah, and that's the great thing about, he's in jail. He's working out every day. Of course he looks like that,
One of the things that's kind of true about this show that's also true of The Sopranos and other parts of your filmography is that there's great humor in investigating the kind of quiet parts of the lives of characters who often, when they're on screen in other iterations, they're very explosive, and we're concentrating mostly on their eruptions. You find quite a lot of rich material, and especially quite a lot of humor in the moments where they're just trying to do regular things, where they're trying to kind of, where they're at their most banal, their most kind of listless and boring in a way. Can you tell me about sort of threading that in here? Because it's a surprisingly funny show. And I guess, people don't often think about humor necessarily when they think about Boardwalk, when they think about Sopranos, when they think about Tulsa King, but it's in there, and it creeps up on you.
Yeah. Well, this is a comedy. This is a dark comedy. And not the kind of comedy where it's like a joke, a punchline, a setup and a punchline. It's really more a comedy of behavior. When you take people, a character like the character of a formidable mafia capo, who that is. It's a strong guy, it's an aggressive guy, and then put that person in a mundane situation, like go to the DMV. it's going to be, and that's the Department of Motor Vehicles here. If you have to go get a driver's license, it's going to be funny. I mean, because they're so on a pedestal in so many different ways, and yet they are now subject to the same bullshit that you and I are subject to if you were trying to go deal with some bureaucrat in some government agency, or go to a bank and open a bank account, but you don't have this form or you don't have that, and that same frustration. And watching a gangster deal with that stuff is just inherently funny. We had a premiere once of an episode of The Sopranos, and there was a scene where Tony Soprano is sitting at the kitchen counter eating a bowl of cereal, reading the back of the cereal box, as we all do. He's just bored and he's reading whatever stupid stuff is on the back of the box. And the audience howled with laughter because it was such a human moment to see the guy do that. But that's something you or I would do, a regular person would do. But to watch a mob boss sit there reading a box of Cheerios was just funny. You go, oh my God, yeah, he does that too, just like me. Or he has opinions about movies and he has the same frustrations with his kids. So putting Dwight, in Tulsa King in these situations is just inherently going to have comedy in it, and watch him deal with the same bullshit that we deal with is always going to be fun. And I love exploring moments like that where he's just as much a victim of the world as we all are. And that doesn't matter that you're a mob captain, you still have to wait online at the DMV.
Once you had, I'm trying not to spoil this for too many people. Typically Script Apart is a spoiler show, but in this case, I really want people, as the show is so new, to be able to discover it as they go. How did you begin to build out the characters Sly's character would encounter once Dwight got to Tulsa? There's something very fun that happens at the end of the pilot, and you start to see the mechanics of where the rest of the season's going to go and what some of the conflicts might be. What's your process for once you've got that initial character? Okay, what's the most challenging environment to put him in? What are the most challenging kind of obstacles to put in his way?
Right. Well, conflict is the essence of drama and comedy. I mean, so it's always about conflict. I mean, you never always try to make it more difficult for your protagonist than easy. Why make anything easy for them? Everything's got to be hit. Like I said, you go into the DMV, he go there, get a license, but you don't get it exactly the way you want. Oh, we don't have an appointment. You got to come back next week. You got to take a driver's test, etc. So, just make it more complicated. So the same thing with these characters, the people he comes up against are very different than him. And then, you just sort of start with the questions, what if? Well, what if this person was that way? Or what if this person, was a, kind of a criminal themselves? Or what if this person also was in prison and relates to Dwight, in a way like that? And just, again, how do you throw as much conflict into that relationship as possible and give them, let them breathe and let them become real people. And then it's, once you've got those characters, just putting them in the same sandbox and let them interact and play with each other and butt heads, then that's the way, that I build it, and take it from there.
You mentioned this is a dark comedy, and I'm glad you mentioned that, because there were certain shows this reminded me of, and there was a really interesting circularity to seeing a bit of Barry, for example, in this. I don't know if that was a reference point for you guys, but seeing the influence of shows that themselves were influenced by shows that were only able to get on air and sort of take the risks they took because of previous work you've been involved in. What's that like as someone who's kind of been in the business for so many decades to kind of be able to reap the rewards, I suppose, of those earlier shows you worked on that did kind of prove that you could break these rules and you could go in darker directions and you could take risks in the way that Boardwalk did, that Sopranos did?
I think a lot of it is having confidence in the audience. It's so much of it is believing in the audience and believing that they are smart. I like to assume my audience is smart, that they know a little about history, that they can witness, some adult content without having a stroke and a hissy fit. And the world is still going to, they're still going to get up and go to work the next day, and sometimes, you deal with studios that they get very nervous and wringing their hands over, are people going to understand this joke? Are they going to get that reference? Or they, and the tendency is to want to dumb things down. And I always push back on that and say, and there was one of my most favorite things that David Chase ever said. He wrote a line on The Sopranos. I can't remember what it was, but I think somebody at HBO said, there's only going to be 3 people in the audience who get that. And David said, yeah, those are the 3 people I wrote it for. And I said, good for you. He said, I don't care if they get it or not. Somebody's going to get it and they'll appreciate it. And here's the, if you don't get it, you don't get it, or you'll understand it because of context clues, or you can look it up if you don't understand it. I can't tell you how many times I watched Mad Men, and then when it was over, I had to Google what did they mean? Oh, that's what that was a reference to. That was some pop culture thing from 1962, or whatever it was. It was fine, and I actually liked it. So the idea that everything has to be homogenized and so instantly understandable it's just somebody said, and I've said this before, I don't know who to attribute this quote to, but they said, art asks questions, it doesn't give answers, and if you aspire to create art of any kind, even the art of storytelling and just entertaining somebody with a darkly comedic TV show, it's okay to ask questions. It's okay that the audience doesn't have everything wrapped up in a bow and spoon-fed to you. I don't like that. I much rather end an episode of something and go, wow, and think about it, or what did that mean? Or I didn't quite get that. Or, I also try to write I try to write dialogue as if I'm sitting in a restaurant and eavesdropping on people, and you're not completely understanding everything, but you're picking up snippets of the conversation, and it's enough for you to infer what's going on there. Just keep it right above that level where you don't have to know precisely. It doesn't have to be so on the nose that you have to know precisely what they're talking about, but I get enough of it that I understand. And then that's what makes it feel real. Oh, that's how people talk. People very rarely say exactly what they mean. They always talk in half sentences and half truths, and they lie to each other and they lie to themselves. And, you sort of have to read between the lines to get the reality out of it.
Is that like an iterative process, finding that right level of dialogue? With the experience you have, Terence, do you get that first time in that first draft?
Not necessarily. I mean, I do go back and I'll reread it and I say, okay, if I knew nothing about these characters and I knew nothing about the circumstance I'm depicting here, what was going on, and I heard these words or read these words, what would I take away from it? You have to it's kind of a tough exercise. You have to go, okay, I have to put myself in a situation where, again, my mind is a blank. I know nothing. I'm reading this. Do I understand what the writer is trying to convey to me? And sometimes I go, I don't think I would get this. And I make it a little clearer with each pass of the script. I go, okay, now I think anybody who's paying attention will understand what I'm trying to convey.
And from a creative perspective, do you notice much of a difference writing a show like Tulsa King, which is obviously streaming era TV, and there's a certain elasticity, a certain flexibility that theoretically comes in with that. Do you find that creatively different to writing Boardwalk, writing Sopranos, things like that? Is it liberating to not have to necessarily stick to the same structures around ad breaks? Theoretically, you could play with the length of the episodes, things like that. Yeah, what kind of the main differences you've noticed, and for the most, are they good or bad?
Yeah, I mean, but because this is really a comedy, there's more license for silliness, for example, or a greater acceptance of the reality of the world that you're in, because you are this show is kind of played with a little bit of a wink to the audience, so it's never going to be The Crown. So I know that going into it. And the audience should know that going in. This is a light drama / comedy. So that, frees you up in a lot of ways. Boardwalk was, much more, of a serious drama. I mean, and I think it had a lot of humor in it as well. But it was a much more serious drama. And we tried to, depict history accurately, and there was a lot more research that went into it in terms of making sure we were truthful to the circumstances of some of the reality depicted on the show. Same thing with Sopranos. It was obviously a much more serious drama, even though it had comedy. So this is very different. It's sort of a different set of muscles, in terms of the writing. You kind of, again, it is played a little bit tongue in cheek, but that said, the poignant moments are poignant, and the action needs to feel real, and there needs to feel like there's something at stake here, even though it is funny, at the end of the day. I mean, sometimes some of the most poignant things I've ever seen have been comedies. I've never cried harder, than at some Neil Simon plays, and oh my God, I didn't see that coming, and that's what's great about it, is you don't see it coming. Or even, you watch a show like Frasier, which is really funny. And then it takes a left turn where you're like, oh my God, it's really, really deeply poignant, which is so satisfying.
And again, I asked a sort of fairly similar question earlier, but I'm really curious about like your instinct. Like when you write an episode of TV that clicks for you on the page, like Pine Barrens, I suppose, is the best example, widely regarded as one of the best episodes of TV of all time. Do you know once you've do you know instantly when you've written a Pine Barrens, when you've worked on an episode of Tulsa Kings, that you just like leaps off the page to you? Do you have a good sixth sense for like this is going to click?
I didn't. I had no idea Pine Barrens was going to resonate the way it did. I thought it was funny, and I thought it was very funny. The barometer is really just your own sensibility, and it's the only thing you've got. And it's how we get through the day. If I were to share a story with you, I'd say to myself before I told you, I'd say, I think this is funny. This happened to me. I think this is funny. I think Al's going to like this. And then I would share. That's why I would tell you, because I think it's funny. I think you're going to think this is funny. If I think this is sad, probably you're going to think it's sad. So, generally I think like, okay, I'm like most people. So if I find this funny, I think most people are going to agree with me. And that's, unless you're completely out of touch with the rest of the world, generally that's true. You come home from work. Oh, funny thing happened on the way home today. And you tell your family, if they all look at you blankly, they go, oh, that didn't go the way I thought. But usually they'll find it funny too. And that's how I do it with writing. So if I hit on something that I think works and it makes me laugh, chances are it's going to make you laugh. And if you can do that enough, you can have a career doing this for a living. Is
it funny at all to you to be, I think it was 91 that you arrived in LA, 94 that you got your first kind of credit. As we mentioned at the top of this, you came to LA to be a sitcom writer, and you were writing specs for Fresh Prince. You were writing for Sister Sister.
Yeah.
Now, 30 years on, you are here doing ostensibly your most comic outing yet. Like, does it feel full circle? Do you feel like you took a strange detour to get to write your big comedy?
Yeah, it's funny. I didn't, and again, I wanted to be a sitcom writer mostly because I couldn't imagine writing anything that took longer than 22 minutes. I could not imagine how anybody could possibly write a movie or even a 1-hour show. So, but a 22-minute sitcom episode, I thought I could do, and I thought I was funny, and I was told I was funny by my friends and family, and I thought, oh, okay, I can do this. So, as I slowly, branched out into, longer forms, I was a drama writer then suddenly, but then the dramas that I gravitated to and then started soliciting that wanted me to write for them were dramas that had comedy in them. And then the best gift was, dramas that had character-based comedy, not setup and payoff. It turns out I was a much better at the comedy of The Sopranos or Tulsa King than I am at sitcom comedy. I wrote on a show called The PJs. It was a animated or claymation, foamation show, actually, with Eddie Murphy as a character. And I wrote with a murderer's row of comedy writers: Dave Flabat, Saladin Patterson, Michael Price, Larry Wilmore, Mark Wilmore, Steve Tompkins, one after the other. Many of these guys who went on and still writing for The Simpsons. To sit at that writer's table, and I go, oh, you think you're funny? You ain't shit. Look at these guys. Just like you can't believe how out of your league you feel when you're sitting with these. These are the best comedy writers in the business. And these are the guys I worked with who are my close friends. But I found what I do best is the kind of comedy that comes from behavior. And just, again, it's not a joke and a punchline, setup and a punchline particularly, but it is, again, the observational humor of take a Tony Soprano and put him in a situation, or take Paulie and Christopher and throw them in the woods and let them just behave the way they normally behave. And that's where I shine comedically, I think. And, less so in the traditional sitcom world, which is, again, ironically, is the place I thought I would find my home, but I actually found it in dark comedic drama.
And in terms of the future, Terence, do you have multiple seasons of the show mapped out? Like, how far are you looking ahead in terms of Tulsa King?
No, not mapped out exactly. But, when I first started it, I thought, oh, this is easily a story I hope can go on for 4 or 5 seasons, or series, as you call them in the UK. I always say, oh, is this series 1? I go, Oh, you mean season one? Yes.
It gets confusing.
So yeah, I mean, I do have it. I do kind of have, I did start this with an end game in mind for Dwight's character. But I always make the analogy, a series is like you're driving from Los Angeles to New York, and you're going to make stops along the way. You're going to stop in Las Vegas and Detroit and Chicago and Pittsburgh, and then you'll end up in New York at some point. And each one of those stops being, New York to Las Vegas is season one, and Vegas to Detroit is season two. And how do we get there in between are the little episodes. So I have a vague idea. But like everything else, like I never wrote a term paper in school and that wasn't due the next day. I have to have pressure. So I don't really know until somebody says, we're shooting this in 6 weeks. We've got to make decisions. Now suddenly I have the clarity of the gun to my head, and I go, okay, is it the red one or the blue one? It's the blue one. Let's go this way. Until then, I'm kind of thinking, it could be this, it could be that. But then once somebody says, all right, now it's go time, we got to make decisions, then I can have that clarity and just sort of do it. It's funny. We talked about The Wolf of Wall Street before. I wrote the first draft of The Wolf of Wall Street in 18 days. It took me 2 months to get to those 18 days of procrastination and research, and I can't write until I have dinner with Jordan's dad, and but then once it got to the point where Martin Scorsese is waiting for the script and he's expecting it in 3 weeks, I was like, oh shit. Then suddenly I didn't get out of my chair for 18 days, and I just wrote it and said, okay, here, it's done. So that's kind of how I do it. I would not recommend that, by the way, but that's how I do it.
Does your commitment to Tulsa King now mean that kind of other projects have had to been put on the back burner? Like I spoke to David Chase a while ago, who was saying this was around Many Saints of Newark, and he said that he was gearing up to write a sequel, but that he wanted to write it with you. Is that happening?
Right. It is not as of yet. I keep holding out hope. Actually, David called me while I was talking to you before. I happened to glance at my phone and he left me a message. So maybe he's calling to do it. I don't know. That would be great.
Yeah, we could do a 3-person.
That we should get him on the phone right now. That as of right now, it's not happening. But I would do it in a heartbeat. Of course, anything David ever wanted to do, I would say yes to immediately. He's my mentor and one of the best writers I've ever known. That is not happening, but yeah, I mean, it's hard. We don't officially have word on season 2 for Tulsa yet, so I'm optimistic that it will happen. And if that happens, then certainly that's what I'll be doing for next year. And if not, I've got some feature projects and a couple of other TV things I'm playing around with. So I'm very lucky in the sense that I always seem to be busy. So I'll be doing something. Oh, I hope it's Tulsa King, but stay tuned.
Is there anything that you haven't yet achieved, a story that you haven't yet been able to tell that is kind of your white whale at this point that you're really hoping to be able to tick off at some point?
There were several TV pilots I've written, that are, not really, moving ahead for various reasons. A lot of them are, very expensive period pieces. There's a book called Tokyo Underworld, about a true story about a guy named Nick Zappetti, who was sort of a low-level criminal who moved to Japan in the aftermath of World War II, as a Marine, and kind of hooked up. He was a supply sergeant, and during the occupation and rebuilding of Japan, kind of hooked up with the Yakuza. And within 2 years of getting there, was a millionaire, because he sold goods to the Yakuza that were for the government. That's a story I'd love to tell. There's another movie I wrote called The Dale, a very true story about a woman named Elizabeth Carmichael, who in 1974 invented a 3-wheel car called the Dale that got 70 miles to the gallon. And this was at the height of the gas crisis in the 70s. And she was going to put Detroit out of business, and it was going to be great. It turned out to be a complete scam. Not only was the car fake, she was actually a con artist. She was a trans woman named Elizabeth Carmichael, who, as before she transitioned, was a man named I think Richard Michaels, who was actually on the lam from the federal government for counterfeiting. So it's a great story, and wow. That's kind of we're hoping to get that made as well. I think I'd also like to write a memoir at some point. I think I'd like to try that, and I will. I just I'm not there yet, but it's sort of percolating, and people seem to enjoy the story of my crazy life. So at some point, I'll put that down on paper.
I look forward to all these projects. Terence, thanks so much for joining us today. I should let you call
Absolutely,
Mr. Chase back. Say hi to
I'll
Mr.
call
Chase.
him, see what he wants. Stop calling me. I told you not to call me here. I will do that. Thank you so much. It's really a pleasure. Really fun talking to you. And if you ever find yourself in LA, give me a shout. You can have tea. I'll have coffee, and take it from there. And bring your coat. Bring your heavy coat.
I'll be bringing it. Don't worry.
All
Terence,
right.
thanks again so much. I really do appreciate it.
Same here. Thank you. Bye-bye.
You've been listening to Script Apart, hosted by me, Al Horner, produced by Camille Demek. Thanks for tuning in. We'll see you next time.